Welcome. This is D.A Sports. I'm your host, D.A Sports. Thank you. This is episode number 35. In today's episode, we just have a couple things to get into. We are going to recap my picks from NFL Week 18. And then, of course, we're going to finish with my last top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings for the season. So let's get into it. So to start, we got to recap my picks from NFL Week 18, the last week of the season. Now, of course, to start, we're going to get into my pick 3. Now, this week's pick 3, I did go 2-1. So still a positive record, wasn't undefeated, but overall still good. And for the season, in my pick 3 picks, I finished with a record of 38-13. So definitely a great record overall, something that should be noted going into next year as I continue to make these picks. So breaking down each game individually, as if you remember from last episode, I said that I was going to pick one game from each time slot. The first game on the list, which was from the early time slot, was the Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. I predicted the Philadelphia Eagles would win, and I was correct. Philadelphia was favored to win by 2.5. They did actually cover the spread. Final score was 20-13. Now, the reason I said that this line was as close as it was is because Saquon Barkley wasn't going to play and try to rush for the record. On top of that, Jalen Hurts was also still not playing. Ironically, from last reports that I heard, he still hasn't cleared concussion protocol, which could be a problem going into the playoffs, which I'll touch on a little bit later on in this episode. But nonetheless, I still said that I think the team was good enough to get the job done and beat the Giants, and they did that pretty soundly. It was a relaxed game, one of the games where, as many of the games were on Sunday, where a team that had their playoff position locked pretty much took it easy and played a lot of their reserve players in important spots, and they were still able to get the win. The win didn't really mean so much for them as a team because it didn't change their seeding. The loss for the Giants was actually more beneficial than it had they won, so it's kind of a win-win for both teams, and I was right on my first pick of my pick 3. Now, the next pick in my pick 3 was from the midday time slot, the second time slot of the day. That's the 1:30-ish time slot for here on Pacific time. And that pick was to pick the New York Jets to beat the Miami Dolphins. The New York Jets were favored to win by 1 point over Miami, and they did cover the spread. Final score was 32-20. Now, this game had a close line, and the reason why I picked the Jets was actually the reason why they won. I said that Aaron Rodgers, knowing that he had a terrible season, didn't want to go out as bad as it has looked, and I knew he wanted to leave a lasting impression that he could still be productive, and that's exactly what he came out and did. He had one of his best games of the season. He threw multiple touchdowns. He threw a touchdown pass to Davante Adams. So even in the case, if it turns out that he decides that he's going to retire and this is his last game ever, he at least finished on a positive note, which is what I expected for him to do. So they were able to pull off the win. It's a really kind of saddening in the sense that Miami still technically had a chance to make the playoffs at the time that their game started, but they never really looked into it, which is pretty much what we've seen all year when Tua doesn't play. The most interesting thing that came from this game was the soundbite from Tyreek Hill at the end of the game in the locker room. He basically did an interview where he stated that he was upset with the team. This is his first year that in his entire career where he's not going to be playing in the playoffs. And he basically suggested that he is open to being traded and no longer playing in Miami, which is funny. The funniest part about it is that he said he had to make the best decisions for his family and potentially leaving the team. But it's not really about his family. It's about himself. Because if it was about his family, then it's about making money, which essentially was the excuse of why he left Kansas City to go to Miami, because Miami could pay him more. There's no way he went to Miami thinking, oh, I'm going to be more successful in Miami than I was in Kansas City. There's no way he thought, oh, yeah, I'm going to leave the best quarterback in the league and go to an injury-riddled quarterback who can't throw the ball deep, as deep as Patrick Mahomes, and think, oh, yeah, this is going to be better for my career. Like, no, he was going to get the bag, which made sense. He went and got the bag, he got the money, and I will never fault anybody playing sports about getting the most money possible, especially in his case because he already had a Super Bowl ring, so it's not like he was still chasing his first ring. He already got a ring in Kansas City, so getting the money at that point makes sense. And it's in his hometown area, so it all made sense for him to go. But once you make that decision, you can't then cry about it when you're not seeing the same success that you're seeing from the team you left, who has done nothing but win the Super Bowl since he left and is in prime position to do that again this year. So he's essentially crying for no reason. He's got to get over it. But overall, back to the pick, the Jets did win the game, and I was correct on my pick. Now, the last game in my pick 3 was the Minnesota Vikings to beat the Detroit Lions. This was the biggest game of the week. This was the most important game because the winner of this game determined the number 1 seed in the NFC. I predicted that Minnesota was going to be able to get it done because they were the more healthier team. And to me, in recent weeks, they look like the better, well-rounded team in terms of offense and defense. Detroit was favored to win by 3 points. This one was the one that I was completely wrong about. And I wasn't shocked that Detroit won because I knew that they had a really good team. But I was shocked by how decisively they did win. Minnesota looked in shambles. And Detroit's defense, with all of their backup players that they were playing, I believe they have like somewhere between 11 and 13 defensive players on IR. Yet they were able to frustrate Sam Darnold all game. He was missing throws high all game. He missed 2 or 3 easy touchdown passes. He forced the Vikings to play a game that they don't usually play. They're not a big fourth down, go-for-it team. I think they're actually one of the lowest in the entire league. But then multiple occasions during the game, they found themselves going for it on fourth down and getting shut down. And they lost. They lost the game 31-9. This game wasn't close. This was, to me, the most impressive game all season from Detroit, especially considering how injury-riddled their defense has and how much points their defense have been giving up. I believe their defense had given up 30 points or more in like 3 out of 4 games before this game, which is terrible. You can't go into the playoffs like that expecting to win. So for them to beat who I regarded as the best team in the NFC going into this game, and to beat them convincingly, very impressive. Definitely something to look forward to going forward as they go into the playoffs. Detroit did earn the number 1 seed, so they will get the bye, which gives their injury-riddled team an extra week to get healthy, which can only be positive for them. As for Minnesota, it's a little daunting, them losing because of how they lost. They're now the 5th seed. They go on the road this upcoming week for the first wild card week of the playoffs. And honestly, Detroit laid out a blueprint for how to get to Sam Darnold. And if other teams take this same approach of just daring Sam Darnold to make quick decisions, they could be one and done, which would end up being probably the most disappointing fall to the end of a season of any top-tier team all year. So we'll see how it plays out, but that was the game that I was wrong as a part of my pick 3 for this week. Now, the next pick in this week's picks was my lock of the week. This week's lock of the week was the Green Bay Packers to beat the Chicago Bears at home. This one I was wrong about. So this is the first lock of the week that I've gotten wrong in about 12 weeks. So I was wrong this week. It brings my season total to 13-4. So overall, still a great record on the season. Now, yes, Green Bay did lose. They were favored to win by 9.5. They lost 22-24 on a last-second field goal. Well, not last second, but end of the game field goal by Chicago. And we know the reason why they really lost is because Jordan Love got hurt in the first half and then he was out for the rest of the game. Now, granted, Jordan Love wasn't playing great. Well, he was still playing. But nonetheless, I think most people would agree that had he played the whole game, they probably win the game. So, in any case, if you make a prediction and then the starting quarterback for the team you expect to win gets hurt, they're probably going to lose. Most teams can't survive their starting quarterback not playing, which will also be addressed in the next topic that I talk about. But, yeah. So, yes, Green Bay lost. I lost the pick. But without Jordan Love, it's kind of expected. The biggest impact is that they are saying that his injury wasn't that bad, that he potentially could have come back in the game if they really deemed it necessary, but they didn't, so they played it safe and kept him out. Because if Jordan Love is injured going into the playoffs, then it's going to be a bad look for Green Bay, and they're not going to be able to make it out of their first game. They do have a really tough game, so we'll see how it plays out. If he has no setbacks and he's back to playing at his peak, then they definitely have a solid chance to pull off an upset. But if he's in any way hampered at all, they have no shot at all, and they're going to be one and done. So that was my pick for the lock of the week. Now, the last pick in my set of picks this week was the underdog pick of the week. Now, I mentioned in making this pick that part of the reason why I made this pick is because it's pretty much the only time I'm ever going to get to pick them for underdog pick of the week, which is the Kansas City Chiefs. I picked them to try to pull off the upset against Denver on the road. Kansas City was favored to lose by 11, and they didn't even come close. So I was wrong on this pick, bringing my record on the year for underdog pick of the week to 4-13, which is definitely awful. But again, as I've mentioned in previous weeks, this is always going to be the hardest pick because it's very rare that a team favored to lose by more than 3 points actually wins the game. In this particular week, there was a team that did it. The Chicago Bears were favored to lose by 9.5, and they won. But of course, as I mentioned in the previous topic, that was mainly a product of their the Green Bay starting quarterback getting injured, which obviously nobody can predict. Now, in terms of this game itself, the Chiefs lost 38-0. This was the worst loss that the Chiefs have had in years. Don't get me wrong, there was a time when stuff like this used to happen. As a person who's been a Chiefs fan since 1992, I have seen our fair share of games of us getting smacked around, but it's been so long, it was almost numbing to watch. So there's two big takeaways from this thing that I want to approach. One is to any media person trying to suggest that the Chiefs essentially lost on purpose to the Broncos because they didn't want to see Cincinnati make it into the playoffs. That is ridiculous, okay? Yes, I understand that a few years ago, the Cincinnati Bengals came into Kansas City in the conference championship game and won the game and went on to the Super Bowl. And out of all of the active quarterbacks, Joe Burrow's the only person that has a win against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. But nobody is afraid of Cincinnati. People seem to forget that was the last time that Cincinnati beat Kansas City. Also, that team wasn't as good as this team is in terms of being well-rounded. Also, it took an absolute collapse from Mahomes for them to even win that game, which I don't see happening ever again. So the idea that they're trying to avoid Cincinnati is ridiculous. Also, it's ridiculous because in order for them to even play Cincinnati, it would mean that Cincinnati would have to go to Buffalo in the first round of the playoffs and beat them. So if you ask any person in the organization, I'm pretty sure Kansas City would rather play Cincinnati than play Buffalo. So, yeah, that notion that they tanked on purpose is ridiculous. Also, considering the fact that they have done the same pattern of things every single year. Last year, during the last game of the season, they had already had their spot clinched, so they sat players again. And they did happen to win against the Chargers, but the Chargers weren't very good that year. Denver is a good team. They're making it to the playoffs for a reason. So when you have all your starters who are needing to win to make the playoffs against a team who's essentially playing majority of their backups, that's what's going to happen. I think the biggest thing also that I took away from this game was it really kind of crystallizes how valuable Patrick Mahomes is. Now, yes, I get that he wasn't the only starter that was sitting in this game. There were several starters that sat. Obviously, Pacheco, Hunt, Kelsey, Hopkins, and Worthy all sat. But a lot of these players that played on offense in this game have also played during the year with Patrick Mahomes. Carson Steele was a starting running back this game. He was a starting running back earlier in the season when Pacheco got hurt in week 2. Juju Smith-Schuster was the number 1 receiver in the middle of the season. Justin Watson was the number 2 receiver in the middle of the season. So, and I think 3 of the offensive linemen that were playing in the game have played during the season. So, it's a testament that the Chiefs were able to get through the entire season with only 1 loss with their starting core players, considering that a lot of these players that got smacked in this game on Sunday were a part of the teams playing, and some of them had starting roles at different points during the season. So, all in all, though, obviously I was wrong about this pick, and that concludes the picks for that week. So to finish off the episode, we are going to quickly get into my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week 18. These are the last top 5 and worst 5 rankings for the entire season. So let's finish it off right. Obviously, at number 1, I'm still going with the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs finished the season 15-2. Obviously, their last loss didn't really count considering that none of the starters really played. But overall, I still feel like they have shown to be the best team in the league as everything is kind of gelled together, as a lot of their players are starting to come back and get healthy. They've proven that their offense is more explosive than it was in the middle of the season. Their defense has finally got it back going. And I think that every team in the AFC is not looking forward to going to Arrowhead to try to win a playoff game. Now, at number 2, I'm going to go with the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills finished the season 13-4. They, like Kansas City, sat a lot of their starters in the last game of the season, and they ended up losing. But for the team as a whole, they definitely have to be impressed. A lot of people didn't predict that Buffalo would finish the year with 13 wins, I being one of them. So I'm definitely shocked. I think part of that is the narrative that will lend itself to Josh Allen winning the MVP. He played great. He carried the team. They have wins against both of the number 1 seeds in each conference, so that's definitely a plus. And to me, they deserve to be at number 2. Coming in at number 3, I have the Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions finished the season 15-2, which also very great. If you recall, Detroit was the other team that I predicted to go to the Super Bowl before the season started. So considering that both of my Super Bowl picks finished the regular season as number 1 seeds in each conference, I feel pretty confident about my preseason picks. And they finished the season with the tie for the best record in the league. Like I mentioned earlier, Detroit had the most impressive win this week against Minnesota. So they definitely have to have a lot of confidence, proving that their injury-riddled defense can still get the job done against a top-tier team as they start the playoffs. At number 4, I'm going with the Minnesota Vikings. I thought about dropping them further, but if you think about it, they did finish the season 14-3, which definitely exceeded everyone's expectations. 2 of their 3 losses came to the number 1 team in the NFC, and the other team was to another playoff team. So overall, they had a great season. I think they still deserve to be at 4. I think they still have the potential to be dynamic in these playoffs, and we'll see how it comes together. Obviously, Sam Darnold can't play like he did on Sunday night if they expect to go further, but I just don't expect it to continue to play like that. So I think that they deserve to finish as the number 4. And then bringing in number 5, I had to go with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles finished the season 14-3. Now, if there was proof that Jalen Hurts is 100% healthy, I would definitely move Philadelphia up. I probably would even move them as high as number 2 on this list, but Jalen Hurts got a concussion and hasn't cleared concussion protocol yet. They're saying that they expect him to clear concussion protocol this week, but if it took 2.5, 3 weeks for him to clear it, how much effect is that going to have on him coming game time? I don't know. That's the only reason I'm have them at 5, but overall, great season for Philadelphia. A lot of people picked them to finish second in their division this year, and they finished first pretty easily. So definitely a great season for them, and they deserve to be at the number 5 spot. Now bringing in the worst 5 at 28, I got to go with the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, kind of crumbled. It's kind of crazy because if you saw how they started the season 2-0. They looked like a team that was going to be, a problem for people to deal with. And then they fell apart, and now they finished the season at the bottom of the rankings. This is a team that was disappointing to me. I actually predicted in the preseason that they were going to be tied for the lead in the division at the end of the season and end up going into the playoffs. I was definitely wrong. Now, again, a part of that product was that Derek Carr was out for the season. And even before he was officially out for the season, he got hurt for a few games. So anytime you lose your starting quarterback, that's definitely going to change the dynamics of your team's potential. And that's what happened here. So overall, they finished the season 5-12, and I think they deserve to be at the 28th spot. Coming in at number 29 is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville finished the season at 4-13. Overall, just a pathetic season. Yes, they're another team that had their starting quarterback get injured, but even at the time when he got injured, Jacksonville was already playing like a bottom-tier team. They already made the announcement that their head coach got fired, so we'll see what kind of changes they make, see if there's a culture change or something else. But this has been pretty disappointing for Jacksonville. I feel like Jacksonville has a lot of talented players, so in order for them to change, it shouldn't take much, but there definitely needs to be some improvement, especially from Trevor Lawrence, if they expect to get back into the playoff mix where people expected them to be. Now, coming in at 30, I got to go with the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns finished the season 3-14. Now, Cleveland has probably the most interesting dynamic going into the offseason as far as what they're going to do with their quarterback situation. Deshaun Watson still has a hefty amount on his contract, so that if they decide to move on from Deshaun Watson, they'll basically be in the same situation that Denver was in this year, which while taking a huge cap hit. But I don't feel like Cleveland has the same organization that Denver does and able to still manage through that cap hit and still be productive and make the playoffs. So I feel like next year is going to be interesting. There's questions about, aside from Watson, are they going to draft a quarterback, which a lot of people are saying they're going to. Then if they do draft a quarterback, are they getting rid of Jameis Winston and DTR because they just drafted DTR 2 years ago? So a lot of things they need to figure out. Myles Garrett is also very upset because he doesn't want to be a part of a rebuild, which I totally understand. He's one of the best defensive ends in the entire league, and he wants to win. He's been on a sorry team essentially his whole career, so I know he wants to be productive for a team that is productive overall. So we'll see what they do going forward. At 31, I got to go with the New York Giants. The Giants finished the year 3-14. They had probably the most their season was so sad because it was so much in the public eye, starting with the offseason Hard Knocks, showing how they debacled the Saquon Barkley situation and the quarterback situation. They did announce that they're keeping Brian Daboll as their head coach. I believe they're also keeping the GM. I'm okay with Dayball staying. I think you have to get rid of the GM who convinced the owner that, hey, it was a good idea to let go of Saquon Barkley, who then goes to your rival team and runs for over 2,000 yards without playing the last game of the season. That alone, and saying that they needed to trust their quarterback, who everybody else seemed to know wasn't really good, and then they end up cutting him. Like that to me is an obvious fireable offense for a GM. I don't know how he's keeping his job, but nonetheless it is. I think with that being said, and yes, they'll probably draft a quarterback, I don't expect anything from the Giants going into next year, which means they'll basically be in the bottom five again, and then maybe then they'll finally fire the GM. I don't know. But they definitely deserve to be in this 31 spot based on their season as a whole, and it'll probably be in this bottom five come next season also. Now, finishing up the last spot at 32, we got to go with the Tennessee Titans. Titans finished the season also at 3-14. I don't think most people had high expectations for this team. I think they did have higher expectations for Will Levis, which they got proven early in the season is just not the answer. So I do think that they'll be back in the quarterback market to see what goes on. They do have some players that, I think they can carry forward to make this team better. They also have the benefit of playing in a terrible division, so it really doesn't take much for them to be successful. So they're in the worst division in the league by far. So we'll see how everything is going forward. But for now, they deserve to be in that last spot in the worst 5 picks. So that wraps it up for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.